Hi, and welcome to the 13th installment of this One Voice webinar series. These updates come to you from the National Tooling and Machining Association and Precision Metal Forming Association advocacy team in Washington, D.C. That's on the communication side, me, Caitlin Sickles, and Paul Nathanson. We are both with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. Also on the line are the guys from the Franklin Partnership. That's Omar Nashashibi and John Guzik. And as many of you know, they do your on-the-ground lobbying work here in DC. As always, we have lots to cover in today's webinar. Particularly, and we flagged this for you before, the deadline for PPP applications is this coming Tuesday. That's June 30th. So look out for that information. Additionally, as we go through this, you'll want to start thinking about the conversations you plan to have with your lender. There'll be a lot of conversation about forgiveness, and you'll want to be listening for that information. You may have questions. There's a lot of content here. You may have questions. Please enter your questions into the chat box. And as we usually do, we will get to as many as possible during the session, and we will follow up with others if we can't cover your question during today's webinar. Also, you can find a recording of this webinar and all of the slides we show on the onevoiceinfo.org website. That is the website we've set up as a rapid response platform for COVID-19 issues. You can find this webinar there, as well as all of the previous 12 One Voice webinars and several Bracewell webinars put on by Bracewell labor lawyers. Finally, you can find more content on that website as well, and we encourage you, and we will encourage you again, to listen to the Talking with One Voice podcast, where you can find updates from us between these now bi-weekly webinars. With that, I will turn it over to Omar and John, who will walk through the agenda and all of the other content that's going to be covered today. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you, Caitlin. What we're gonna touch base today on is CDC is doing a number of periodic presentations, video presentations, and the one they just did one recently, specifically on manufacturing. So we want to highlight that to you. We're going to talk about the Main Street Lending Program. It's back up and running. Same with the EIDL loan program, or as you recall, there's the PPP Paycheck Protection Program. There's the EIDL program through the Small Business Administration, and then there's the Main Street Lending Program, all providing resources and loans for manufacturers. So we'll talk about that. But we're going to spend most of our time on the PPP forgiveness loan application. It was rolled out, it was reworked, and the forms have come out, and we'll spend a tremendous amount of time on that. Then we're going to talk about the current status and what is the future of the PPP moving forward as Congress considers the next phase 4 of COVID-19. And as Caitlin says, we're always willing to answer any questions. Don't necessarily wait till the end of our webinar. Feel free to ask a question in the box in the right-hand side, and we will try to address your questions throughout the webinar presentation. So I believe it was on June 8th, the CDC did a presentation on manufacturing. In there, it talks about many of the things, and the link below shows how you can link into that presentation. And they recommend you or your human resources person link into it, fast forward to the 19th minute, and they'll talk about many of the issues that we have already talked about: exposure risk, creating a plan of how to address, COVID in the workforce, and and how you educate and train your new employees moving forward. So this is just another toolkit that has been put forth. Another toolkit is going to be coming out shortly in our next presentation. We'll talk further about that. As you all know, during the COVID shutdown, there was, only essential businesses are up and running. And then they had to make a determination of who was essential employees and non-essential employees. So now that the country is starting to open up again, the OSHA has issued some specific guidelines on what people need to do to address non-essential workers coming back to work. They have come up with a 3-phase plan on how best to bring these non-essential workers back to work. The first recommendation is telework. We recognize that necessarily doesn't always work for those in the manufacturing world, but under phase 1, critical requirement is to limit your workers' interaction with each other. Perhaps provide some flex time opportunities for your employees, and then take into consideration, perhaps create some special circumstances for your high-risk employees, those over 65, or your employees who may have high-risk family members at home, so they recommend special circumstances for that. And then probably the most important one is to limit non-essential travel. Looking at phase 2, a little more interaction, but with strict, medium or strict social distancing moving forward. Limited travel can continue, as you can see through there. And then phase 3 is where you return to normal business operations moving forward. But then, so as you see, now the EEOC has also issued some guidelines on the use of antibodies. As we've mentioned in previous webinars, you can take the temperature of an employee going into work. But then the question was, can you test your employees for antibodies as a determination of whether an employee can come back to work or not? Well, according to the ADA, the testing for antibodies is a medical procedure, and therefore employers cannot test their employees for antibodies moving forward in that. Finally, and I'll turn it over to Omar for this point, is the Main Street Lending Program is back up and running, and there's real opportunities there for manufacturers if they want to pursue that route.
That's right, John. Thank you. And so something to keep in mind when we're looking at access to capital and moving forward, the PPP is exactly what it was intended to be, the Paycheck Protection Program. It wasn't the access to capital to buy equipment and raw materials program. And so that's what we're all focusing on now, as many of our businesses and communities are trying to start to reopen, and access to capital is just as critical as ever. This is an important opportunity to take a look at. The Main Street Lending Facility is now up and running. The way that you do this is you go through your lender. This is not similar to the EIDL program. You would go directly to your lender there, and as the borrower, you need to ask if they are participating in the program. The portal is now opened. They do not have a centralized list of lenders that are participating in the program, as we did over at the SBA 3P program. So it's really, you have to just connect with your lender to see if they're participating in it. And there is some concern that it is 300 basis points above LIBOR. So it is definitely not as generous as the 1% rate that your 3P program would turn into if you were not seeking forgiveness on that loan. However, it is another opportunity to access this capital. And just as important, if you have currently taken or you've completed your PPP loan, you are still eligible for the Main Street Lending Facility. So that is an important avenue for many of our members. So take a look at that. That is now up and running. It is now open. They just issued another batch of FAQs on the 19th, I believe it was, with regards to the MSLF. And so now your lender should have, actually they do have application forms for you to fill out. At least it's been published from the federal standpoint. So contact them as well. Another thing we want to point out, especially that many of our members were already had healthy debt because they were investing in their business prior to COVID, and now they're faced with more than one avenues that are out there that they have on their books. What the Main Street Lending Facility allows you to do is to refinance existing debt, and even more so if you are seeking to refinance one of, say, multiple loans, they won't count the one you're trying to refinance against you and hold that on your books. So that, let's say you have 3 loans out there, you're trying to refinance one of them, the other 2 will be those that they will put on your books when they weigh you as a borrower. So that's another clarification that was just issued in the FAQs that just came out, and you can link at that. Again, that's coming out, that's being run by the Federal Bank of Reserve of Boston, and you do go through your lender. You do not go directly to the Fed or the Department of Treasury on this one. We encourage you to take a look, see if that's an opportunity for you. And before I turn it over to John here on the 3P loan status update, just a quick reminder as well, as mentioned previously, the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loan, is now back up and running. It was closed for roughly about a month or so and only eligible to those that are in the agricultural industry. Now they have permitted and are allowing, our understanding as we reported last time, they have put out all loans that were pending through, I think it was about the 13th or so, whatever that Friday was, so I think the 12th, they were able to get all those pending loans out on the EIDL, so they are active. There is quite a bit of money left. You can see they've only spent $113 billion out of the 350 that's been allocated. And a reminder that the $10,000 advance, almost no questions asked, 1,000 per employee, is also part of this program. This is separate from the 3P program. Again, another opportunity to take a look at. John, speaking of the PPP program, here's how much money's been spent, and you can see where manufacturing ranks down there.
Yeah, they've spent $514 billion. Manufacturing is holding their own. Interestingly, as you look at these numbers, is we rank 4th in the number of dollars dispersed, but our number of loans actually approved has been lower. And so essentially what this is telling us is manufacturers, compared to construction and other professional services, are getting a larger share, a larger percentage of these loans moving forward. We do want to remind you that if you have not applied for a loan, do it right away. There's still $128 billion in the Paycheck Protection Program that is set to expire on June 30th. Now, don't wait till June 30th to file your application. That's when the SBA can no longer process these loans. So we know from our survey data that 91% of NTMA and PMA firms have already applied and have been approved for loans, but those few who haven't, submit it today, submit it this week, your loan this weekend with your lender, so that they can start the processing and get your paperwork over to the SBA before 11:59 on Friday. Interestingly, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the GAO issued an update. If you recall, there was a period where you had to verify your availability of credit, your credit readiness, and so some people had to make a decision whether they would return the loan. The GAO issued a report just yesterday that 170,000 loans were returned, a total of $38.5 billion. So that's just a little, I know many people looked at that. It was also to address, the Shake Shacks and the Ruth Chris's and the LA Lakers who received loans. That is also part of that return. But as I said, the loans expire on 11:59 on June 30th. And so for those who haven't already done so, make sure you get the loans in. Omar, the big news is the issue of the forgiveness loan application and instructions moving forward of how to pursue your PPP loan forgiveness.
Yeah, we do finally have some updated forms to reflect the lobbying work that we did on the previous legislation, the PPFA. And now what we can see is exactly to John's point. If anyone wants a copy of that government accountability 400-page report, let me know, shoot me an email at the end of this. There's some really interesting things on the findings. They have some major findings and recommendations, and they really recognize the frustration of the borrowers and lenders, frankly, because we do have now over 50 FAQs have been issued. I think it's 49 or so from the SBA and Treasury. We're now, I think, on our 19th or 20th interim final rule. So just adding more confusion, and that report really showed quite a bit. So shoot us a note if you want it. You do have two forms, as John mentioned, your 3508 as we had prior, but now they've also issued a 3508 EZ. It certainly simplifies in terms of the background paperwork that you need to provide. So in the next few slides, we're going to run through the differences here and what they each look like. Let's take a look at the test that you would decide how to determine whether or not you should use the EZ or the full 3508. And just to put it in context, the 3508 is 5 pages. The EZ is 1 page with a page of instructions. Most of you, the way to simply look at this, if you have 0 FTE reduction in either case, you already are a candidate for the EZ. If you have 0 FTE reduction, and you also have no salary wage reductions below the 25% and using the unable to rehire test, you may use the EZ. If you have no FTE reduction, no salary wage reduced by more than 25%, and you use the business activity safe harbor reduction, you may use the EZ as well. If you do have an FTE headcount reduction from your reference period to the date of your application, which we'll discuss in a minute, that is your final date from when you have to report. If you do have a reduction, you may not use the EZ, and you'll therefore have to use the full form. If you have more than a 25% reduction and do not meet either of the safe harbors that were previously provided, you also will need to use the full form. I'm going to pause here and answer one of the questions that we received. Will the 45-day Michigan shutdown order qualify as the safe harbor from a government shutdown? The answer is yes. Whether he's asking this question in regards to the PPP or in some of the other provisions that are out there. So for example, under the CARES Act, you have the employee retention credit that John will talk about being expanded later. The employee retention credit, if you are not a PPP recipient and are claiming that credit, they do have a safe harbor as well due to government instructions on shutting down. And so yes, in this case of the safe harbor, there is language in here that does say due to government orders, because the government orders are based upon the federal directives that came out. So if you were to look at whether it's Michigan or in Pennsylvania and some New Jersey, for example. So if you take a look at Jersey, they just issued an FAQ, the IRS did an update on the employee retention credit that says, even if you did not have a full or over 50% government shutdown, or full shutdown rather, and you had some essential and some non-essential, they're allowing you to claim the credit in some cases there. So again, if the state tells you to shut down, you do meet that safe harbor. We're not going to run through these forms. You've got to honestly go through them with your CPAs, but this is what the EZ looks like. It's pretty basic. Please note, as John will discuss here in a minute, the $2 million checkbox that you've got to acknowledge whether or not you've received a loan over that size. Again, here's the main difference. This is a full 3508. The main difference you're going to take a look at is on reductions. You're going to need to submit more paperwork. There is a worksheet Schedule A that accompanies the full 3508. You do actually have to include the name of employees in there, certainly of the owner employees that are 100 and over. So that it's going to take some work in terms of doing that. And so that's why we appreciate what Caitlin rightfully pointed out, that you do need to start talking to your lender and CPA about your approach to, do I use the EZ? Am I ready to use the 3508? How do I approach it? And we'll talk here on the next slide. So keep paying attention here. If you are going to do the difference, it's more about the paperwork to back up the reduction to help with the calculation. That's really the main difference where you want to focus on. As we focus now on these next two safe harbor slides, this was the biggest question that we had before. When do you have to return your employees by to their FTE headcount, and how long do you have to keep them there? There was concern about some that if you had FTE reductions from your reference period that you provide on your loan application form, if you had reductions, you'd have to return them and sustain them through December 31st. That is not the case. As you can see here on step 4, it is the earlier of December 31st or the application that it has been submitted. So what we're looking at is you put in your FTE headcount on the date that you submit the application to your lender for forgiveness. This is where the strategy comes in on with timing of when you submit this application. We would advise you talk to your HR team, look at your stuff. If you have already returned your FTE count and your wage reduction has not gone below 25%, yes, we urge you go ahead and start that process of getting it in. If you have not returned your FTE head count, then you need to start thinking about how you can do so in order to have the full forgiveness. So take a look at that. Again, this does maintain all the other safe harbors. Those are unchanged. We had a question, do the FTE reductions that shouldn't count against us, voluntary resignations, disqualify us from using the easy forgiveness form? On that one, that is an excellent question, or whether or not you've got to meet. No, that was, let me go back to that slide for you right here, Dan. So that's a good question. So if you had employees that did not return, for example, and you want to try to use the EZ, this is where it says, and business activity and unable to rehire. So to that person that answered the question, whether or not they can use easy forgiveness, if they had people that had voluntary resignations and that's why they had the unable to rehire, this is where you take a look. That's your safe harbor and how it applies on the EZ. So yes, you are allowed to use those two safe harbors on those two. So thank you for asking that question. Last one here before we get ready to round out. On the interim final rule that we got on Tuesday the 22nd, this addresses wage reductions. You all need to keep track of two things here. Your FTE headcount needs to be returned to the top level at the time you submit your application for forgiveness. However, it's separate calculation for your wage reduction. And remember, it's per employee, it's not aggregate, so it's per the employee. If you have reduced beyond that 25%, you need to bring it back up. Most of you, if you have a 24-week period elected and you only have your loan and you ask for forgiveness after 16 weeks, if you reduce the employee's wages, they are going to deduct that from the amount you're allowed to request for forgiveness across the entire 24-week period, even if you only did it for 16. So as you look at the example over there, let's say you were doing, I'll simplify it even more. Let's say you're paying them $10 a week. You reduce the wages by $3 a week, so now you're paying them $7. The way that they nail you on this is they make you do the $700. So you'll take the $300 less calculation and multiply it by 24 weeks, not by 16 weeks. So that will effectively reduce the amount even further, but that you're allowed to request for forgiveness. So again, check your lender, look at and figure out what is the proper timing for when you submit that application for forgiveness. And lastly, before I turn it over to John to talk about disclosures, this is critically important for many of our members that have owner employees, basically the owners that are also working there as at the shops, not those that are just down at Naples collecting a check. Keep in mind, those that are borrowing either on the 8-week or the 24-week covered period, if you borrowed prior to June 5th, you may elect the 8 or 24. If you borrowed after on June 5th or after, you are in the 24-week term. You can ask for forgiveness anytime prior to the 24 when you've exhausted the funds. The employees, they are capped at $15,385. So this deals with the highly compensated employee 100,000 threshold for 8 weeks. If they're on a 24-week schedule, the employee is capped at no more than $46,154. Then take a look at the owner employee. The owner employee is still capped at the $15,385 for 8 weeks or the 8 weeks of 29 compensation, whichever is less. However, if the owner employee shop takes the 24-week period, then the owner employee compensation is still the lesser of $20,833 or the 2.5-month equivalent of the average 2019 salary. Basically, the way you need to look at this, the owner employee is not permitted to be compensated at the same top line level as a traditional employee is if the 24-week period is elected. So that is something that you need to monitor. That is a question that does appear on the full 3508, though you do need to take a look at that and pay attention to it quite clearly. Last 2 points here quickly. Again, distinctions between S corporations and this latter one, the last one here is new on the C corps. But for you S corporations, the owners cannot include their health insurance costs from the business when calculating payroll costs. They made that determination because they believe it's already included. It factored in the compensation. Just when John and I, when we pay ourselves as pass-throughs, I pay for my own health care, and the company, which is still me, pays for my health care as well. So they don't allow that. However, they are for the S corporations allowing the employer retirement contributions to be considered as an eligible cost. But lastly, the C corporations, the owner employees may include both the employer retirement and health insurance contributions then. But John, I know there's been a lot of questions lately. It shouldn't come to a surprise for anyone because it was on your loan application you signed, but on disclosures, there's a lot of talk in the media.
Yeah, and actually at the last webinar, I believe we had mentioned, based on the Senate Finance Committee hearing where Secretary Mnuchin testified, he was asked would he release the names of all those who received the PPP loans. And Secretary Mnuchin says no, he would release the names to the General Accounting Office for purposes of government oversight, but he would not release the names. That led to a hue and cry and uproar in the House and in the Senate. As we've often said in the past, that was an unsustainable position. And a week later, Secretary Mnuchin, in an agreement with the Senate and the Senate Small Business Committee, said that yes, they will release the names of loan recipients of over $150,000. Now, it should not be a surprise to any of you on the phone who have received this loan, because in the initial loan application, it had indicated that recipients of these loans, their name, businesses, and the amounts of these loans would be disclosed. And so, as part of this agreement, for all loans over $150,000, the business name, business address, zip code, NAICS code, business type, and certain demographic information will be released to the public. The amounts will be put into 5 different categories, as you can see here, starting at 150,000 to 350,000, 1 to 2 million, 5 million to 10 million. Those loans under $150,000 will be aggregated together. Again, industry type, businesses who receive those loans will be released, but no names will be released. So, for those of you who were uncertain of whether the names would be made public of those loan recipients, be assured that because of after that agreement, they will be released shortly. Actually, I read a news report today that because of the pushback that the Treasury has received, they may even release more information that was required than they agreed to do under the agreement with the Senate and the Senate Small Business Committee. So there's still more to come on that. So This next slide, where do we go from here? As you can see, we've had a number of successes moving forward. We've extended the term from 8 or 24 weeks, extended the deadline to rehire your employees from June 30th, reduced the 75-25 ratio to 60-40 and such. And so, but there's still work that needs to be done. We still need insurance that the deductibility of wages and mortgage interest, rent, utilities would be deductible. There's a lot of discussion about enhancing the employee retention credit. The employee retention credit really hasn't been utilized during this COVID crisis to the extent that many policymakers on the tax writing committees have wanted. But they do believe that the valuable credit that, if allowed, would provide additional resources and capital for taxpayers. But the problem with it is that those who received PPP loans, if you received a PPP loan, you are ineligible to utilize the employee retention credit. And so we believe in the next COVID bill moving forward, we will be advocating, and we are optimistic that there'll be provision that would require the recipients of PPP to take advantage of the enhanced employee retention credit. And of course, we want to make sure in this next bill moving forward that trade associations that are 501c6s like NTMA and PMA would be able to utilize the PPP program. But the big question moving forward, now I'm going to turn it over to Omar in a second, is what happens to the PPP program? Because as we said, it expires on June 30th. There's still $128 billion in the account. Do they extend it? Do they alter the eligibility requirements moving forward? And so, Omar, what do you see moving forward in this next COVID bill that the Congress is looking at?
Yeah, that's the big question right there, John, because you said it clearly. There's $128 billion still sitting in the account over at SBA, and no way they're going to spend that all by 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday night. So now what do we do with the rest of the funds? And no, we're not going to stick it back in the Treasury and give you all refunds. We're going to spend it somehow. And now what is going to happen? Our understanding is right now there's major discussions about trying to be a little bit more targeted with the funds. Many of you were successful in receiving, your surveys tell us 91% of you reported receiving a 3P loan. And so in large part, we credit that with, well, frankly, your membership in associations that are doing things like this. And so you're more aware. But some of the smallest of companies that aren't active in associations and don't have relationship with their lenders, they still were left behind. And so we do still expect to see another round of some kind of targeted support for industry. Obviously, there's the Restaurants Act that's currently pending. They're looking at adding a sizable chunk of money to the restaurant industry that may not recover for at least another year and a half. But as we look at for our manufacturers, there is legislation that's been promoted by some moderate Senate Democrats with whom we've worked throughout this process called the Prioritize Paycheck Protection Program, or the P4 Act. That's been introduced. Now, we're not saying that this legislation will be in the bill, but we put it up here as an idea of some of the sentiment that's come out, because frankly, there is a bipartisan Republican bill by someone we know real well that is along the lines of this one. What they're looking at is providing eligible businesses another 2.5 months of payroll costs up to $2 million, and of which 8 weeks can be forgiven. So effectively, it's another round of PPP loans that you all could use. Again, all the other existing rules and entanglements still would apply, but this could help those businesses that are out there. We've also seen additional support for businesses that had gross receipt sales drop more than 50% compared to the previous reference period a year earlier. There's also some additional discussion about how to prioritize PPP loans for them, because as of right now, the law states, it's not the direction of the Treasury, the law states that a recipient may only receive one PPP loan. So that's something that we do understand is going on right now. And John mentioned the employee retention credit. Both NTMA and PMA are part of a coalition lobbying on that. We sent a letter last week, I believe 16th or so of June, on it, and we've been real active on it. What we're hoping to do, as John mentioned, is to allow that employee retention credit, allow PPP recipients to also claim it. What it is currently, it's a $10,000 fully refundable tax credit at 50% of that $10,000 per employee between the period of March 12th this year and January 21st of 2021. Right now, so effectively it's $5,000. What we're looking to do is increase that up to $15,000 with an 80% take on it. And also right now our challenge is, John mentioned it, part of the problem with the employee retention credit is you have to show a gross receipts drop of 50%. over one of the previous 3 quarters and another 80. So the challenge that you've got there is that you really do need to address that issue, because that excludes a lot of our members, even if you do the PPP fix. So that's why we're lobbying to reduce that 50% reduced threshold down to 20%. But John, even as we open up, and we still need liability protection, and we know Senator Cornyn's working on that.
Yeah, we expect Senator Cornyn to drop his insurance liability package next week. That is going to be, between that, the enhanced unemployment benefits of $600 a week, and money for state and local governments, those are going to be the macro issues that the Congress is going to need to battle over. And I think, as we said in the past, who draws the blood first on this, and who flinches first on those agreements. The issues that Omar was talking about is those targeted inducements for economic activity are going to be underneath those once those larger issues are discussed. We fully expect the Congress to, by late July, to come to a resolution of this. There's nothing better to force a decision in Congress is having a deadline of congressional recess. This one is an important one because you've got the national conventions coming up in August. So that is that motivation to get to an agreement. But clearly, the liability protections is critically important. Omar and I have had Zoom calls and Zoom meetings with a number of House Democrats, while Pelosi has put a line in the sand saying doesn't want to include any business liability protections. Many of the House Democrats that Omar and I have talked to understand the need for certain business liability protections, at least under certain circumstances. So we believe there's progress being made on that front. On the extended unemployment benefits, I was on a call just before I got on this one, meeting with Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri. He used the statistic 40% of the people making under $40,000 are unemployed today. And those who utilize the extended unemployment benefits, it's probably better for them to stay home. And so what is the solution? And so there's a lot of recognition that issue needs to be addressed, whether it's lowering the amount from $600 to $450 or provide some incentives. If you do get a job, some specific incentives, those issues do need to be resolved. And then finally is how much money is going to go to state and local governments, and is that money going to be used specifically for COVID, like the PPP dollars are utilized for, or can it be used for general fund purposes to deal with budget deficits and such moving forward? And so that is the crux of the macro and the micro issues moving forward. And as we mentioned, we anticipate some resolution by the end of July.
Yeah, and I wanted to just highlight something John just mentioned, because we did receive a question about that earlier. The question was related to the $600, what we call the PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, that's provided to individuals on unemployment in addition to what the states are. And we've discussed in the past the challenges with regards to that. We've also discussed in the past the new requirements that are in place on employers. You have to report to your local unemployment office if you've made an offer to return to work for an individual that refuses it, or if you've had someone that moves on to another shop. So you need to be able to document all those issues that are out there. Our understanding is the administration is looking at certainly a lower level. We're not doing another 600 round. We are hearing of some type of a bonus, a return to work bonus based on a certain formula that might end up around the $400 range, but we should have a better understanding by the time we do our next webinar here on July 17th. We know with everything going on with COVID and the inputs that are going up in costs, we just did want to kind of switch a little bit here and bring in our PR folks to give you a quick update on some of the things that they're doing that are essential to this process.
Yes, so this is Paul, in the middle of the all of you going through the current challenges with the pandemic, trade issues still continue to bubble. This week, there has been many reports that the Trump administration is looking to reimpose tariffs on aluminum imports from Canada. As you may recall, Canada and Mexico, our USMCA partners, were exempted from the tariffs on June 1st of 2018, about 2 months in, but the administration claims that there has been a recent surge of imports and have Robert Lighthizer, in his testimony before Congress, the U.S. Trade Representatives, has said they're looking closely at it. The rumor mill is that they are going to reimpose these tariffs. This is bad timing, given that USMCA is starting July 1st. There is wide opposition to the imposition of tariffs and the claim that the surge is unusual. Even the Aluminum Association, which represents domestic users as well as domestic producers as well as foreign producers, have come out in opposition and sent a letter to President Trump. Our coalition on the 232 tariffs lend our voice to opposition to new tariffs. It's the last thing that you aluminum users need is another tax on your aluminum from Canadian imports from Canada. So we just wanted to alert you on that. We're also, as I think we might have mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that the Commerce Department is taking comment on its 232 steel and aluminum products exclusion process, looking for comments on how it's working, ways to improve it, complaints. So our trade coalition will be submitting comments, and if you have information you want to share on background, please feel free to contact Franklin Partnership or Bracewell, and we'll incorporate your experience into the comments that we're working on right now.
We bring this up because what we're seeing is the administration is granting exclusion requests under COVID auspices for goods coming in from China, yet they're cracking down on aluminum that is not a national security risk. So that's why we wanted to mention that here briefly, as this affects the impact of what you all do in the COVID response.
And just a reminder, next week we'll have a new episode of Talking with One Voice, the podcast of NTMA and PMA. So please, wherever you get download your podcasts, be on the lookout for a new episode next week. Next week's our off week for the webinar, so please tune into the podcast.
Thank you. And we encourage you all, we haven't asked for much, but we hopefully found some of these webinars helpful. As you all know, your NTMA and PMA teams back in Ohio and around the country and here in Washington, we're doing everything that we can to help you. We do encourage you all, as we send this out later today, please do contribute to advocacy. It goes to make sure that your voice is heard, not our voice. We're doing this for you all out there. So we really do encourage you to donate. There's links here, and please contact Bill Padnos at NTMA and Christy Carmigiano at PMA for more information there. As we mentioned, we're going to try to work our way backwards from when John and I believe we're going to have a final COVID bill, so that way our end of the month would come on July 30th, so 31st rather. So this puts our next webinar on Friday, July 17th. Everyone should receive a notice on that as well shortly. Let's go ahead and answer just a few questions. I know we're already at 12:38, running a little bit long, but a couple of questions here that we received. Again, all disclaimers, we're not CPAs, lawyers, accountants, but we'll do what we know. Can pay to an employee vary from pay period to pay period, so long as the total for the 8-week period does not exceed $15,384.60? For the salaried, yes, our belief based on the language that we've seen below, yes, that's what they're looking at. Your cap is at $15,384.60. So if you do have, let's say, a first couple of weeks in the first 2 pay periods, you're paying them a little bit lower, maybe nothing for the middle, and then yes, it can fluctuate. There's a limit on that. It's a little bit different calculation for your hourly, but for your salaried, for your highly compensated HCE employees that are making 100,000 or more, that is the correct calculation for them that are there. Another one, if hourly rate did not change, but overtime hours were reduced, does that constitute a wage reduction? Again, check with your CPA, but we've got pulled up right now the application instructions for the 3508, and the person that asked, we'll send this over to you. Let's see, get your take. But everywhere it goes in here, it focuses on hourly wages. So enter average annual salary or hourly wage during covered period or alternative covered period. So everywhere you go in here, it only refers to hourly wage. They do not go in any of the instructions on forgiveness anywhere on overtime. So it would be our understanding, and we can work to confirm, that reductions in overtime would not constitute reductions in hourly wage. So that's something that we can further confirm, but that is the reading that we've seen, the language that's here in front of us. Just one or two, I think we might have answered the safe harbor reduction with regards to the 3508 EZs because the headcount is lower than it was. Another one was, is there time is there any leeway in the regulations that allow that employees who voluntarily terminate do not adversely affect a company's FTE threshold? The answer to that is yes. There is a safe harbor provision that has been in place now for several weeks, since I think June 2nd or so, we got that safe harbor. So yes, if somebody retires, refuses to return to work, takes another job, and you've documented this in writing, that does not count against your head count. That is up there as well. Last one, I think, and please enter in, as John mentioned, any questions you have over on the right-hand side. Is there a time limit for the CARES Act FFCRA to be paid back to the employer? We have only received 60%, and it seems like the credits have stopped coming. That's something we can look into. We haven't heard how people have been receiving those credits, whether they've been coming in periodic, whether they've been coming in tranches. Also, it makes a difference whether you filled out IRS Form 7200 with regards to the advance on that too as well. So we'll start asking around the CPAs how that's doing. Our assumption would have been they would be refunding you for whatever you applied for, and they'd be pushing that out the door in that measure. But we'll start asking around and welcome some of the peers that have also requested a refund under the EPSLA or EFMLA, sorry, the Expanded Paid Sick Leave and the Expanded Paid Family Medical Leave Act. It seems like forever ago we were talking about the 2 weeks and the 10 weeks. So those are there. Any other questions? As always, this presentation will be sent out. You can find the recording, as Caitlin said, on onevoiceinfo.org. Please, the links to donate are down below. We do encourage you to support your association that's been supporting you all the last several months. With that, not seeing any other questions. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you on noon Eastern, Friday, July 17.
Thank you.